Hey everyone, I'm Luke.
And I'm Max.
Welcome back to the Upside Down Thoughts NASCAR podcast, and we are here with a special guest. We got Zach in the house.
How's it going, everybody?
He's a big NASCAR fan along with us, so we're gonna bring him on for some more opinions, more insights on the Coke 600, which is obviously a long race we got here today. Grab some popcorn and get ready to listen to this one. We got 400 laps at Charlotte, and we're gonna kick it off right with qualifying. So take it away, Max.
I jumped right into qualifying. We got Chase Briscoe on the pole. It's his first pole of the year. And then right behind him, it's really none other than Kyle Larson. This guy's going to be running the 1100, so he'll be starting the day in Indianapolis with the IndyCar race. But if he would be making it to Charlotte in time, he would be starting second. And right behind him is his Hendrick teammate and William Byron, with Chris Buescher and AJ Allmendinger rounding out the top five.
Yeah, we got William Byron, who was my pick to win, as I mentioned last week. Qualifying right where he needs to be in that third place position. And you mentioned AJ Allmendinger in fifth, with a great qualifying for him for that colleague team. So, hopefully he transfer for the race. But moving on down here, we got JHN in sixth and Ty Gibbs, two Toyotas in sixth and seventh, and then Noah Gragson, a great qualifying in eighth for that Haas factory team, who definitely needs a good finish here. And then we got Alex Bowman and Christopher Bell rounding out the top 10s. A pretty normal top 5 and top 10 with, a few dark horses in there. Obviously, it's a long race. Anyone can win this one. So it's good to see a couple of these, underdog teams, finding their way in the top 10 with the qualifying.
Right, absolutely. You mentioned the dark horses, quite literally Noah Gragson of Ford, and starting top 10, front row motorsports. That team's been struggling so far this year. So to see them inside the top 10, it's a great effort there. But moving outside the top 10, I'll let Zach, I'll let you take this.
I don't. Hold on. All right, so next up for qualifying, we had, Ricky Stenhouse in the 11th spot, Tyler Reddick 12, Justin Haley 13, Hendrick 14, McDowell 15. You got the two Spire teammates in McDowell and Haley there rounding out the top 15.
Yeah, and the Spire teammates, specifically, you see Hocevar and McDowell qualifying similar with each other. We got Haley in one of his best qualifying efforts in 13th, so good stuff from Spire. Moving down just to blitz to the rest of qualifying, Logano 16th. We got Jimmy Johnson running in 17th here in qualifying. So, this is part of his 5 or 6 races he runs with Legacy in that 84. Then we got Josh Berry, Ty Dillon, Denny Hamlin running at that top 20. Ryan Blaney, Chase Elliott 21, 22. Not good qualifying efforts from them, but a long race. Qualifying does not matter too much for Charlotte. That's why we're kind of, accelerating through this. Zane Smith, Kyle Busch, Flores, and Austin Dillon, two RCR teammates there, running at the top 25 with Busch and Dillon. And just to finish us off, we got Cole Custer, SVG, Riley Herbst, Bubba Wallace, two teammates, Connor Zilic in that 87, running part-time, Todd Gilliland, Brad Kozlowski, Cody Ware, Derek Kraus, Balicki, Hocevar, who crashed, and Ross Chastain, who crashed in practice. Those are the bottom 2 cars. They got 40 cars in this packed field, so super cool to see the most cars we had in a race since Daytona 500.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned the Chastain that he would crash and not even get a lap in. So to see him starting in last, you already know there's going to be a headline. He's going to be moving through the field. In previous years, he's always been up there at the end. So knowing that he's going to be pushing through the field real quick and he's got 400 laps to do it, knowing he's pretty much going to be there at the end. Obviously, we already know what happens being a few weeks in the future, but I'll let you get right into the race so we can get straight into it.
All right, guys, before we get into the race here, just want to make a few little announcements. So we do have the Pocono race next week, as we're a little bit ahead into the future, as you guys know. So look out for a little bit of announcement. We might do some special things for Pocono as we're going to the race. So that's Sunday. We might be creating an Instagram, Twitter page, all that stuff, so you guys can follow us. We might have some special exclusive content for you guys to see. Hopefully we get all that done, but just be on lookout for that stuff, guys. So getting into the race here, like we mentioned, Ross Chastain, like you mentioned, just hit the wall in practice, didn't even get a lap in, so he would be starting in the back. And right away, we'd go green from Charlotte with an amazing pre-race from Prime. I just want to mention that the first Prime broadcast we had this season, and they did an amazing job. That pre-race with Carl Edwards, Corey LaJoy, kind of had that college game day feel, if you guys have ever seen that. Really showed the fans, showed all the military pre-race stuff. Super, super cool. So just wanted to touch on that before we get into the race. Chase Briscoe would lead us with Kyle Larson entering turn 1 in this massive 40-car field. Kyle Larson would obviously take over the lead on the outside line in 3 and 4 right away. So you could see the pace in that 5 car, and he was definitely a little bit upset with how his day went in Indy, so he wanted to, get out to a lead a little early in this race.
Yeah, there was a little bit of scare there too in Indy, kind of watching that race early on with the whole weather delay, kind of even, seeing if he might have to stop the race early and, get over to Charlotte in time, to make the just to even make it in time. But like you said, he ended up having that incident on that lap 91, so it kind of all worked itself out in the end.
Yeah, there was that concern right from the beginning that you mentioned. Like, they had a backup driver ready for him. His helicopter was in the infield from the start of the race. So the fact that he's able to, get to Charlotte, because, this is an IndyCar podcast that we're going straight to the Cup race, that he does get there on time, and he's coming from an IndyCar crash, so he's actually already a little frustrated. And the fact that he's getting straight to the lead here, it's kind of exactly what he needs, so he doesn't need to be sitting in traffic, because that can obviously be a perfect catalyst for frustration. So to see him out early is kind of a big thing, I think.
Yeah, definitely good points made there on Larson. But as quickly as we'd see Larson get to the lead, we'd still William Byron, his Hendrick teammate, past Briscoe, who was dropping in the order pretty quickly. Definitely didn't have the pace on the race start as we saw in qualifying, but William Byron would contest Larson for the lead, and they'd kind of take off a little bit to the first opening green flag run that we've had here. But Larson would still maintain his lead over Byron, and you see a lot of passes, in the 10 to 15 area as guys were figuring out their cars, and as are on a bit of a longer run than you'd see in most Coke 600s at the start here, getting into the lap 20s range. Larson would get over to almost a second half leave over Byron. So you could definitely see the pace and the drive Larson had. I kind of thought after his Indy crash, he'd have, a lot of motivation to run this race or want, but he came in, he, expressed to his team that he's obviously upset, but he's ready to, challenge out there for a win in the Coke 600. And you could definitely see what the pace he has over Byron, his teammate.
Yeah, go ahead, Zach, if you want to elaborate on that at all. I don't have anything for that particular topic, but I pretty much said everything I wanted to get in there.
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, kind of just, moving along, Carson Hocevar, I feel like he's been a big topic of conversation, but kind of qualified, not that great, but, really early on in the race, advancing 15 spots, get up to 24th spot. And, a little later on, early on in lap 20, Chris Buescher, qualified well, made a pass on Briscoe to move up to fourth of this spot in the race. And, I feel like he's kind of known for, maybe hit more of his road course driving, but, really good qualifying here. And seems like, early on, he had a really decent car start off the day.
Yeah, 100% agree on
there. With everything you said about Hocevar, he definitely could see the pace after hitting the wall in qualifying. The speed transferred over to the race as well. Moving on back to the race, on lap 37 here, we see Kyle Larson just had a turn forward, just brushed that wall, the same kind of wall that Hocevar hit in qualifying, and it would spin him out through little the Charlotte Roval turns, you could say, in the infield, bring out that caution. And this just sucks for a guy like Kyle Larson, in his second year of the contract for the Indy 500, for the double race Indy 500, Coke 600, and he has a very early wreck that is going to put him down a few laps. And man, you just hate to see it for a guy like Larson who works so hard to get here, and the reputation he has, and just not a good weekend so far for him.
For sure.
Yeah,
this is a guy.
Oh, go ahead, Max.
I'm sorry, Zach. But yeah, this is a guy that literally had this exact same spin last year. Chase Elliott saw this exact same spin. It almost seems to be a Hendrick spot, that struggle spot for the past few years. And I think this will be no problem for him. Cliff Daniels is the crew chief for this team. And based after his basically viral, we'll say motivational speech about halfway through, I think it was last year's race. Luke, you can correct me if it was a few years back.
I think it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, but I have no doubt that this team will be back. Longest race of the year. It's what NASCAR calls their crown jewel races. So to know that this is more of an endurance race than it is basically a sprint to the finish, this team will most likely be back.
Yeah, kind of going off that, I just want to, pose a question to you guys, the fans. Maybe you can talk about it in the comments. But, as Larson attempted the double, and, something that only has been done by Tony Stewart back in 2001, do you guys think, with the stress of trying to figure out whether he's going to have to leave Indy early, with the weather delay, but maybe he had some fatigue, maybe he wasn't, on top of his game early on in this race. Maybe this could have caused this, I just wanted to, see your guys' thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I was kind of, wanting to say this after you guys made your points, but, this is the second race. He only had a 2-year contract to do this race. And with how the race went the previous year with the rain out, and then missing the 600 completely, with also it being rained out. If I was Carl Larson, I'd be really pissed off because you had that Indy rain delay a little bit, and then you wreck on lap 91 after a bad mistake, and then you come over to Coke 600 and you wreck. You want to do 1100 miles, and you I don't even think he got 600 in. So I don't think he's going to get the opportunity to do this again, with how much money it costs and getting the right sponsor. You mentioned Tony Stewart being the one to really get it done, and I don't know if we're going to see it get done for a while here with just how the sponsors are with IndyCar, and you know wanted to get the 1100 miles done. I don't think there was a talk with Kyle Busch had it all set up, and then Larson took his spot. At this point, I don't think Busch is going to get another opportunity as well. So it just sucks. I would love to see this get done by someone, and I was rooting for Larson, but yeah, I mean, it really ultimately falls on him, which is tough to say.
Yeah, and this brings up, kind of another idea that I kind of heard on the internet, even just the past few days and weeks, that it's, Kyle Larson, since this has basically been a fail the last 2 years, and this is more of a question, I guess, for both of you, but, is there a foreseeable future where he would potentially leave NASCAR if he would get another championship or two and pull almost like a Jimmy Johnson and try to go full time in IndyCar?
I don't know. I think he had a lot of talks about, being better than Verstappen last year, and I just couldn't see Larson racing full time in anything but NASCAR. But that's not me saying that he won't go. I think he could go over to IndyCar, but I think he's just so good at driving these stock cars. It's almost like, why would you, unless something falls off with Hendrick and he doesn't get a ride in the 5 car or something, or he retires and then goes over to IndyCar. I just don't see a reason that he would, in my opinion, or want to. And also don't know what kind of team he would get over there. Jimmy Johnson went over there and got a bad team and didn't run good at all. So it could ruin his reputation for how good he is in a way. I just don't really see a world where he would go over there.
Yeah, I think kind of currently and just looking at the trajectory of his career, I mean, I think it doesn't really make any sense to kind of move on. Like he's been so good, for a couple of years now, and just I think he's only going to continue to get better, and maybe just kind of trying to cement himself in NASCAR, as that GOAT, try to get up there, with the Dale Earnhardts, Jimmy Johnsons, all those guys, the top of the top. And then, maybe once he cements himself, as like, one of the best NASCAR drivers, then like, kind of Luke said, move over, retire, then go to IndyCar.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad both you kind of have your point of view on that, of thinking that he's going to stay in NASCAR. And when I saw those points arise, that's kind of the direction I lean, because I'm like, it's a big point of Jimmy Johnson. He didn't get the funding, didn't run well, kind of ruined his reputation, tried to come back over to NASCAR, kind of save his reputation, and that didn't work either. So, like, when it is time for Larson to hang it up in NASCAR, he should probably just leave it at that. There's no reason to try to better himself, or because I kind of see Kyle Larson retiring. In my opinion, he's not going to retire as a single time or even 2-time champ. I think he's going to be better than that. But there's always the possibility for a career fall off. I just don't see it in his future.
Yeah, I agree. With the 2 or 3-time champ, I think he could be easily a multi-time champion. But just one little question for me, talking about the 1100 mile, who would you guys like to see, if there's ever an opportunity for a NASCAR guy to go over and do it? Who would you guys want to see try it?
I'll let you go first, Zach.
Yeah, I don't know. Kind of looking at it, super early on, but I don't know. I really like Willie B's whole story of not having really any experience, but him kind of just learning from just racing on the computer. I don't know. I heard that and thought that was really cool. So he's been so dominant this year, and maybe he continues to grow in that. And I could like him seeing him going over to IndyCar. Denny's one of those guys. He's been super good, and maybe if, at some point in the next couple of years, if he ever gets that championship, maybe see him moving over as he kind of retires and ends his career. I think that'd be really interesting if those two guys could go over there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the William Byron pick. He has Jeff Gordon kind of behind his back. He has those ties. He has the Hendrick ties already. So he's kind of in the perfect spot for it. But I kind of go 2 different directions. And my first, he's kind of a sore topic right now, but you got to go with the talent, the kid of talent, Carson Hocevar. Like there's so much talent there, and maybe this isn't for another 10 years or so yet. Let him continue to grow. But the potential I see in this kid is really like no one other in the sport right now, to be completely honest. Luke, we always mention it. He's not running for a great team, and he's getting second place runner up finishes. So I absolutely see him as a possibility in the future and potentially running well with it. And then another one I also see is the man we've been talking about, and he was on Hamlin's podcast, Kyle Busch. The fact that he was shut down by the fact that Kyle Larson was kind of chosen over him, but now that Larson has kind of not been able to do it in back-to-back years, is that door now wide open for Kyle Busch? So it's kind of interesting to see who it could be. And, between me and Zach, I felt like we threw out 10 names, but there's really a ton of directions you could go.
Yeah, those are great picks, and I'm gonna kind of answer my own question here, and I think a guy we could realistically see do it, and also contend for a win in both. I think we got to go look at, not to be biased, we got to look at Ryan Blaney. Owner is Roger Penske, who owns the Indy Track. He could get him the sponsor. He could get him the car. He could get him on the best team, which is Penske, with Joseph Newgarden, who is a back-to-back winner. I mean, we got to be realistic here in saying, who is a guy that has all the assets and a team that can win both. And Blaney won the Coke 600 2023 with Team Penske. He's a guy that has the funding and has the team owner to go out there and do it. I agree with both of the points you make. I'd love to see Blaney go and try to do it. Not to be biased, as my favorite driver, but I think he's at the top of the list for guys that can have a car that can win in both races, which is the ultimate goal, to try to win both of them.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely spot on. Blaney kind of went right over my head, to be completely honest, as a good pick. But you mentioned the ties to Penske. He's won the 600, so he's already basically has 2 check marks there. As I feel like that would put him in basically a free car and equipment to win both races. So I would probably say that's the best pick out of all of them. Didn't even really think of him. But moving on from there, heading back to the green flag, I'll let one of you take it from there.
All right. William Byron would obviously be there with Tyler Reddick, and Chris Buescher just behind him. So, Zach, you mentioned Chris Buescher with the good qualifying efforts this season, and he would, get that track position. But Byron would extend his lead over Buescher to half a second. So, like I mentioned earlier, with battling with Larson, we could really see the pace with Byron, clearing Buescher into the turn 2, and then just creating that gap even wider off the couple laps off the restart here.
Yeah, kind of going, kind of looking towards, lap 68. Byron, extends his lead over Tyler Reddick, a little over half a second. At this point in the race, still kind of early on, 6 lead changes between the 3 drivers, and there being 1 caution. But with the Coke 600, there's going to be plenty more of those. So and still kind of jumping in, I feel like we're going to be talking about this a lot for this race, kind of Byron in that leading position. He just had such a fast car, just kind of right off the get-go. Just so much speed, with that 24 car.
Yeah, for sure. He after Larson spun, he basically just inherited the lead. So to see how that car is going to run in clean air, it's going to be fast, because it's a Hendrick 24. That car is always fast week in, week out, especially at the intermediates. So to see him in the lead is, kind of scary maybe for the rest of the competition. But pretty much as soon as we see him in the lead, about 10, 15 laps after, we will see Tyler Reddick pass Chris Buescher, who was running second, and he's going to begin to close in on William Byron, and we're going to finally see a battle for the lead here.
Yeah, and this battle would go on for tens on tens of laps, with these 2 Hendrick teammates, or excuse me, not Hendrick teammates. But William Byron would still, have that pace to battle with Reddick, up into, almost the lap 90s area we see here. And we'd still see a bunch of passes, from second on back, with JHN making a pass on Buescher up to 4th. So you see Buescher fall back a little bit, in the run. But as soon as these guys were, battling up here, and Byron would extend his lead over Reddick, we'd see Alex Bowman slam that wall off of turn 4, similar spot to where Larson and Hocevar kind of had their incidents. And it was a really interesting wreck kind of out of nowhere. But where he was running, and similar line with Larson, I don't know if this is a Bowman problem, or maybe there's something on the track, or there's a bump in turn 4 that I'm not aware of. But very similar wreck to Larson. So I'm interested to hear your guys' points on this one.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'll kind of say I think it's just a matter of getting tight. He's running ninth, so he doesn't have clean air, and these cars they shoot up the track, and you can lose control so easily when you're running in that dirty air, especially tight to someone's bumper. So I think he basically it just kind of got away from him. He got up into the wall, and even if you really don't slam the wall super hard, it can kind of throw you off, and then you try to recorrect hard left, overcorrect hard right, and here you find yourself spinning. So I don't see anything super out of the ordinary. I don't really think there's a bump. I think it's just more the matter of just dirty air kind of killing the nose of this car.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Max. But just bringing a point too up with Bowman, he finished seventh in Talladega, but he's kind of had a rough stretch of races. 27th at Martinsville, 35th Darlington, 37th at Bristol, 35th at Texas. And I feel like he's kind of just struggling. And a guy that had a decent for a couple runs over there in March. Kind of guy that's looking for that playoff push. It kind of just sucks. He's kind of having these events.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to touch on that
for
point a
sure.
little bit even more, and say he's always been that fourth driver for Hendrick. He's not, I wouldn't say I'm not going to say he's the worst driver, but when you're going up against Byron, Larson, and Elliott, you got competition. So I don't know if he's, with those finishes you just mentioned, I don't know if he's not getting the equipment that he's used to getting, or maybe, crazy to say, maybe Hendrick's looking in a different direction with a driver for the upcoming season. You mentioned Hocevar and how good he's running in that equipment. But with these stretch of runs, you don't see this from Hendrick, really ever, with the stretch of 20th on back finishes that Alex Bowman has had, and with a mistake here. I don't know. I'm interested to hear you guys' thoughts, but what do you think's going on? You think it's just bad luck, or not getting good equipment, or maybe that 48 team's not getting the right funding from the team? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I'm all on the equipment train. I think that could basically be 100% of the problem, because we know this is a driver that is able to win races. He won with the 88 at Talladega years ago. He's won at Vegas in the 48. He won at Chicago Street Course last year in the 48 at a road course, which he's not known for being good at. So he has the talent to win. It's just it's really tough to say if it's a matter of just unlucky breaks or if it's the equipment. And with 5 finishes in a row, you start to wonder, how unlucky can you really be? And at what point is it maybe a bigger problem than luck, such as the equipment? Because I wouldn't really go towards skill, but maybe there's different approaches and ways you can look at the situation.
Yeah, I agree with you, Max. And, just looking at this season, even he's had the pole at Miami and at Bristol, so I feel like there's definitely not a race driver issue. I think, like you said, I think it's just tough too. Kind of to Luke's point. I mean, you have Byron, Larson, Elliott, and you're kind of the fourth guy out. I feel like Hendricks, they're putting all their investment into those top 3 guys, because those are all guys that have a chance to win the Cup Series. So, I think he's kind of just on the back burner. And, like you said, Luke, I think that's a really good point. That Bowman being that fourth guy out, could we see, a Carson Hocevar hop in there at some point, within the next year or two? I think that's a really good question to ask.
Yeah, it kind of just brings me, reminds me of Eric Jones in the 20 a couple of years, or no, I would say 5 or so years ago with JGR. There's always in the 4-car team, and I know Penske doesn't have a 4th car, but look at Cindric. It's just the one-off driver that isn't up to as much skill as the rest. So you saw a lot of changes in that 20 car, and even in the 19 car with Suarez, and then Truex eventually getting that ride. I know Bowman's been on the Hendrick team with the 88, like you mentioned, and the 48 for a while, but there's always a question if he's still the right guy for this dominant team and the best team in Cup Series history. I don't know. I don't want to see him out of the 48 car, as he's one of, I like the guy a lot, but as soon as JGR got rid of Eric Jones and then went the Christopher Bell route, you see how that's working out this season. I mean, he's one of the best drivers in the field. So maybe giving the young guy like Hocevar a shot, what could happen? You give Chris Bell a shot, who's mid-20s, and he performs, almost as good as Larson, and battles Larson, contends with him. So I don't know. I'd love to see Hocevar get the shot. I mean, he's putting the work. He's grinding out with Spire, who's, that 3-star team, and he has some tendencies. But he's a good kid, and I'd love to see him get this shot. I'm interested to hear your guys' points on this again.
Yeah, I actually have another point that just came to my mind a minute or two ago, and it's Bowman. A lot of people don't even think about this, but look at the shoes he's filling.
Mhm.
He's not filling in like where Christopher Bell came in and was filling in for Eric Jones. Not that it wasn't huge shoes to fill or to talk down on Eric Jones, but Alex Bowman's coming in after a 7-time champ, So
Mhm.
it's really difficult to kind of even look up to those expectations or, not even meet, but to come close to them.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with that. But just yeah, like we're talking about with Hocevar, the kid he has so much speed, and like we mentioned, earlier in the podcast, racing for a kind of a subpar team. Um, I think, going into that, and like you said, Luke, he has some tendencies. But I think, he's so young in his career. I think he's kind of just, figuring that out. And, he's going to learn. You kind of, you learn with experience with racing. He's going to wreck some guys, but, he's going to learn from that. And, he's going to, as soon as he gets that experience, and especially if he hops into a team like Hendricks, I think the sky's the limit for a kid like that.
Yeah, 100% agree with all the points you made, and especially with Max. He's filling in for that, in my opinion, the greatest driver in Cup Series history, a 7-time champ, Jimmy Johnson. And you mentioned, he's not filling in for a guy like Eric Jones or Matt Kenseth in the 20 for JGR. He's filling in for, like I said, arguably the go to the sports. We're just gonna have to see. It's a judgment call for Hendrick, and I certainly am glad I'm not the one making the decisions for this team. But there obviously is a lot of pressure on Alex Bowman, more I think than anyone on Hendrick. I mean, you're at the brink of maybe losing, one of the most winningest numbers in the sport. So, um, I just all hope out. I hope everything works out for everyone, and Bowman's a good guy, so you can only hope for the best for him. But moving into the end of stage one here, obviously that wreck would get us the green, white, checkered under yellow here, with William Byron winning stage one, Reddick in second, Chris Bell in third, and JHN and AJ Allmendinger rang out the top five. So we didn't mention AJ at all, but he would get a top five in the stage and get his best finish, um, best stage finish of the year. So that's what you got to do. There's 4 stages in this race. You got to be there all day. You got to execute on pit row, which is the biggest thing. You got to give yourself a chance, which is the hardest thing in this race for guys to get done.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have anything to really elaborate on theirs, but unless you do, Zach. But moving on from there, we see the green flag come out again. William Byron, Tyler Reddick on the outside, and Byron will clear exiting turn 2, just a lap and a half after Byron takes the lead. We're going to see caution come right back out for Jimmy Johnson, Cole Custer, and Connor Zilish in the 87 getting together off of turn 4. And I'll let both of you kind of elaborate on this more.
Yeah, I just have
Yeah,
a few
go ahead,
points.
Luke. I don't have much to say. Kind of.
All right,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
Just a few points. And same spot, turn 4, as we've seen a majority of these wrecks happen. And this to me is totally just dirty air, with Cole Custer kind of shifting up, taking the air, and then Connor Zilish on his inside. And a guy like Jimmy Johnson, he's not going to be able to, get off the gas
Yeah.
or whatever. It's just tight. There's nothing you can do. At Charlotte, this is the most common wreck you're going to see. And Max mentioned it earlier with dirty air and how tight it is off turn 4, and that's just it. And Jimmy Johnson, it sucks for him to wreck and have to be a few laps down, but it's no one's fault. It's just tight off of turn 4. It's just how it is.
Yeah, for sure. There's nothing really more to say on it, because I feel like there's a few other crashes that we're going to see in this podcast that are kind of as of the same result and because of the same cause, and that being dirty air. There's not places in Charlotte. It's not a road course, so it's not saying, oh, he jumped the curve, or whatever, and it's not a super speedway saying, oh, we bump drafted him too hard and just turned him around. So I think that's a pretty straightforward wreck for Charlotte, and you don't really see a whole lot of different wrecks at Charlotte unless, it's a frustration wreck like we see Elliott right rear Hook and Hamlin last year into the outside wall, and that's a completely different thing when those things happen, but they're not near as common as these dirty air wrecks are.
Yeah, 100% agree. And like you said, there's not much else to add. It's going to be a wreck that we see continuing throughout the podcast, but off the restart here, William Byron and Tyler Reddick, the same two with Bell, in thirds. Off the restart, Byron would clear, but a lap later, we'd see Ricky Stenhouse and SVG get together, and First of all, what a save from SVG here. A guy first year in the Cup Series full time, and making saves like this. I mean, this is incredible stuff. Nearly 45 degrees sideways through the tri-oval, which is the fastest part of the track. So, um, great stuff to see. And it's not Ricky's fault. Just tight and kind of got in the back of him a little bit, but great save from SVG here.
Yeah, I think this might have a lot to do with SVG, his Australian supercar background. I think that's a huge part of it. Those cars, they're wheeling it 45 degrees sideways, going over curves, beating and banging. So I think that's a huge part of it there. But as part of going back to the contact overall, I'm watching it here now, and it's really tough to say. It's really just two cars getting together. Going into turn one at most of these tracks, it gets real tight. You got people going for the same lane, so I wouldn't exactly call it like Ricky's trying to wreck him or turning him. I think you really said it perfectly. It's really just two cars getting together, and it's not super uncommon.
Yeah,
no, like you said, it's insane save by SVG. We kind of saw him come on the scene, in Chicago a couple years ago, winning that out of kind of nowhere. But I do have a question for you guys. As he kind of cements himself as a full-time driver, we all know he's really good at road courses, but you kind of see him, improving at all, on these longer tracks, these speedways. Do you think he could be one of those top guys, eventually as he kind of gets more comfortable in, these stock cars?
Here's what I'll say quickly.
Yeah,
I don't think I have a lot to say on this point because I don't like what they did with SVG. A single year in Xfinity and then shoots him in the Cup Series, specifically, like we're going to see today, just happened. Him win at Mexico City. That's the only reason you're going to bring him, just to get this, with how the playoffs work, get him into this playoff. I think it's cheap by Trackhouse. I think with how old he is, I think he's like 37 something. I don't think there's any chance he even does anything. This is harsh to say. I don't think he does anything really remotely of note besides these road courses. And it's not his fault at all. I mean, he's a road course ringer. He's from the supercars in Australia and New Zealand. He didn't get developed enough to be, or didn't have enough time to be developed into this, oval racer. It takes time. You see guys in Xfinity and trucks, and even some guys in ARCA. It takes 2 to 3 years down there. Even in guys like in Toyota Racing Development Team, like Connor Zilic and William Sawalich, they're still down there, developing their game because, once you get up here to the Cup Series, it's the big boys. They're not going to give you any space. They're not going to give you any room or hand you anything. It's just how it is. It's a whole different level. So I don't think he's nearly developed enough to even come close to being the top guys.
Yeah, that's absolutely the biggest problem with it. Like he had his full season in ARCA, and everyone's like, this guy's doing great. He's running top 10 in ARCA. It's ARCA series. So the fact that he's going straight from getting top 10s in ARCA and saying, you know what, you don't need to run Truck Series. You don't need to run Xfinity Series. Let's throw you right on a 4-star team in the Cup Series and see what happens. And let's ARCA's only 20-some cars or whatever it is, with the cars that can actually keep pace. So to almost double the size of the field and say, hey, you got this on tracks that are too hard for ARCA to even go to, so that is just absolutely not the right thing to do. We see drivers like, you could go Hocevar, a prime example. This is a guy that started in the Truck Series. He kind of skipped through the Xfinity Series because, he was running super well in the Truck Series, kind of well enough to the point where you're like, yeah, if we give this kid a shot on a lower team in the Cup Series, he should be able to compete. And then there's other examples you can look at, like you could go Sheldon Creed, who started all the way down in ARCA. He came up through trucks. Didn't win a championship, but ran well. Gave him a shot in Xfinity. He's running well in Xfinity. So, you give him another year or two in Xfinity and, does a Cup seat open for him. And that's how the process should go.
Mm-hmm.
Going straight from ARCA to Cup, it's not right. And, in some senses, it can even be dangerous.
Yeah, I just want to add a more touch on that because that's a fantastic point. I think there's a ton of more people deserving of a full-time Cup Series ride than SVG. And I know that sounds like I'm hating on him. I'm not. I think the only reason Trackhouse rushed him into that seat was because of how the playoff system is right now. He's 33rd in points and just won, and he's going to be if there isn't 16 more drivers, he's going to be cemented in the playoffs and get bounced first round, which nothing wrong to him. He's just, there's people that deserve it more. Like you mentioned, Sheldon Creed. I know he hasn't gotten a win in the Xfinity series, but 3 seasons in Xfinity, and he's consistently running in the top five almost every single race. So you look at Justin Allgaier or Sam Mayer, who's really cementing himself as a guy in the Xfinity series, or
You can even look at Sammy Smith.
yeah, Sammy Smith, or Harrison Burton, who just went down there after he couldn't get a ride after 2024. I understand why Trackhouse did it, and it's for that road course ability, but there's so many other guys who deserve a shot to be in this Cup Series and who would seriously have a chance to be the top guys in 5 to 6 years.
Yeah, I've got nothing else really on that point, and unless you do, Zach, it's
Yeah, no,
just
I mean, I do have one question for you guys, and we have it's a long race, so we don't have to go on too big of a tangent here. But Luke, you mentioned with the playoffs, a guy like SVG, like you said, 33rd in points, but he's got that win, so right now he's locked in the playoffs. Do you think that's something NASCAR needs to look at and maybe have a cutoff in points? Maybe say guys got to be top 25 in points, top 30 in points, plus a win to cement them in. Because if you have a guy like you said, like SVG, who's going to come in most likely going to win one of the road courses in a season, then finish below 30 in points, and like you said, it's taken a playoff spot away from a guy that is pretty much a lot more deserving.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. They had that. You had to be top 30 in points to even have a shot to make the playoffs. They had that up until last year. Now, I mean, if NASCAR would grant a playoff waiver, you could win the Daytona 500, park it for the next 25 races, and find yourself racing for a championship. It doesn't really make any sense to me because you can't crown a real champion. And I think if it takes a playoff spot away for a guy like Hocevar or McDowell or even Busher, or even a 2311 guy like Bub Wallace or Tyler Reddick, it's not SVG's fault, but there's guys more deserving. And I'd love to see NASCAR take a look at this, and bring back that rule that you have to be top 30 in points, because you can't really crown a real champion because you have stuff like this happen. And I know it's controversial with the playoff system, and I don't have a problem with the playoff system at all. I think it works for the car we have and the system we have in NASCAR today, but it's just a little bit unethical, if that's the right word, because it doesn't really make sense, because he's not running 30th back on these oval tracks and super speedways, and then gets one win, and then he's in the playoffs. It just doesn't really make sense up in my brain.
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed every point there is to say on that. Zach mentioned going on this tangent, but it is something that does need to be talked about, and something that NASCAR really does need to take a look at. But in all, moving on from there and getting back to the Charlotte race, we will see the green flag stay out, as Shane going 45 degrees sideways would not actually bring out a caution. And, just after they get together, we see Stenhouse get into the wall, exiting turn 2 while running 19th. And I see this as none other but, third time we've said it already, dirty air yet again.
Yeah, 100% agree. Turn 2 is another one of those spots, getting onto a straightaway. And him being in this 19th, 20th position, there's cars all around him, and there's air circulating all around his car. So I think you nailed it. Dirty air is the biggest problem here for Ricky, especially being cautious after he almost just wrecked SVG. But
I think that's really all there is to say on that. It's I kind of mentioned that it almost sounds like we're almost broken records, as everything is very similar to that. Any wall contact, or really, any contact in general, is exiting either turn 2 or 4, getting tight in the wake, as that's a word that we kind of started using in the past few weeks, as dirty air has become a much more prevalent concept. And it's just something that we're just going to continue to see. But continuing to move on from there, we're going to see Tyler Reddick begin to challenge William Byron for the lead. He's going to cut it down to just over 3/4 of a second. But moving on from there, the green flag cycle will start. This is actually the first time that we'll see a full green flag cycle, and that's going to be started by none other than John Hunter Nemechek in the 42.
Yeah, you mentioned the first real green flag cycle we'd see, and kind of starting at lap 150, a little late, but with all the cautions we have, it makes sense. So this is where you have to execute. Because you're going to go a lap down at some point during this, and the last thing you want this race is to be trapped one lap down with how many people are going to be on this cycle, because if you don't get the lucky dog soon enough, you're not going to have a chance. So pit road execution, no speeding, getting onto pit road safely. That's the name of the game. Blending correctly once you get off pit road, no penalties, no mistakes. I know that sounds easier said than done, and 100% it is, because if I was a crew chief in this race, my head would be spinning and going in 100 different directions. But keeping everything under control and everyone calm is the biggest part of this race to happen. And we're going to see that through the green flag pit cycle. Everyone get through clean. Some guys have a slower pit stop than others, but just the biggest name of the game, and I can assure you, every single crew chief is saying this: just get through pit road fine and let the driver control what happens. Because if everyone does their job, a top 10 finish is almost guaranteed.
Yeah, for sure. And not to linger on with the pit stops, so we'll see Carson Hocevar be the last one to pit. He'll end up pitting from the lead. It's going to rotate Christopher Bell and his 20 team to the lead. And just as that happens, Riley Herbst is going to spin out of turn 4. It kind of looked like he might have been trying to pit. I believe that's what it was. I don't know if you have anything to say on that. Kind of a different concept. He didn't have anyone run in front of him, so this isn't dirty air. He didn't get tied up or go into the wall. It definitely looked like he was braking, but he was very late on the brakes and didn't really get it wound down in time to get onto pit road safely.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. And watching this live, I couldn't even really tell you what happened. I think you nailed it perfectly. I think he just didn't get it down in time and misjudged it a little bit. So I don't really have much to say. I think you completely nailed this one here.
Yeah, it's really just a tire lockup. Crank the wheel hard left as pit road is, and you kind of just lose the underbody of the car and it gets away from him. But continuing to move on from there, we will see Reddick actually get past Nemechek, who's continuing to run well for second. And as Reddick moves up to second, William Byron will inherit the lead once again, as Christopher Bell is going to fall back to fourth. And it is now a 9-second lead over Tyler Reddick. This is that William Byron domination as we have seen in previous weeks. I believe was at Darlington where he did the same thing. It's when he's in the lead, he likes to do these sort of things.
Yeah, and you mentioned Darlington. Well, we all know what happened that race with the pit stops. Like I keep mentioning, I'm going to keep saying this, keep pounding it over and over and over again. He lost that race off of a bad pit stop. And he has a 9-second lead, and as we're going to see moving on here, he's going to end up winning stage 2 at end of lap 200. So 100 lap stages here, but I know he's a great driver and all, but seriously, guys, this race is won on pit road, and I will keep saying that over and over and over again, because if you mess up on pit road, you're not going to give yourself a chance. So that's the name of the game of this race, and I'm going to keep saying that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you pretty much said there. If Zach, if you have a point, I'll let you poke it in real quick. But
I think you guys have great points. Just like we said, kind of the whole podcast so far. Willie B so far, throughout most of the race, he's been so fast. Just domination, like you said, Max. With that 9-second lead on Reddick, but like you said, Luke, it's a super long race. One of the longest races of the season. So, kind of executing on pit road is kind of the name of the game here.
100%. But, just going on here to everything, obviously a lot of guys, any chance you get, you're going to want to come into pit road. So at the end of stage 2, I know they just pit, but with those tires, 20 laps on them, they're going to come down again. So all the lead lap cars will make their way. But Byron would still maintain his lead, and Hamlin would get out of pit road on second. So you really see Hamlin's pit road for the second time, getting him out to a better track position. So you can definitely tell these two pit crews of the 24 and the 11 are really executing quite well.
Yeah, for sure. And you've said it twice. It's the name of the game, especially at Charlotte. It's the name of the game at most of the intermediates. And when you have so many pit stops in a race like this, I actually didn't get a chance to watch this race live, but I saw prior to the race, they were expecting somewhere between, I believe it was 6 to 10 pit stops that they would need to get to the end of this race. So if you're picking up 2 spots on pit road every time, that's 12 spots right there. And, that can really be a race won easily there, especially if you're the leader picking up those 12 spots, because even though you might not be advancing any further in the field, you're going to advance further away from the guy in second, third, fourth, and so on. But it's kind of like beating a dead horse, but it really goes to show you how important pit stops can be. And it's not just the driver, the pit crews need to be on their A game too.
Yeah, 100% agree. If there's anything else you want to add, Zach, go ahead. But if not, we'll get right back into the racing.
Yeah, I think be good to keep moving on. But yeah, like you guys said, just keep repeating it. Got to execute on pit road.
Yeah, 100%. But moving on here, just after the restart, a couple laps in, we'd say Kyle Busch, tag that turn 2 wall in 23rd, and again, to sound like a broken record, but that's dirty air. And with where he is running, it's very similar to Ricky, his incident. So, just very tight, bunch of cars flying around him. That's just all I have to say on that little incident here.
Yeah, I actually want to take it back about 15 laps just prior to the restart. This was Memorial Day weekend, so this is the biggest weekend in motorsports. For those of you that don't know, we did mention it a bit at the beginning with, the Indianapolis 500 double, but this Sunday, the Memorial Day Sunday, or I should say the Sunday right before Memorial Day, there's the Indy 500, which starts about at noon, and then there's the Coca-Cola 600, which starts about 6 o'clock at night. So you kind of have your racing all day. And do I not mention Monaco in the morning with F1 as well? But, it's this huge day, and NASCAR, being as patriotic as it is, they will actually pull the cars down pit road before they go green at lap 205. It'll end up being, and they take a moment of silence for all our troops, and for everyone overseas and that has lost their lives. And I kind of just wanted to mention that, because we wouldn't even really be making this podcast if it wasn't for those who, sacrifice their lives and, fight for our country to be as great as it is.
Yeah, 100%. I'm really glad you made that point. I just want to make another little point here. All the guys have on their top of the windshield, have their name, and then they drive with a fallen member of service. Just super cool stuff from NASCAR and Folds of Honor, who's heavily sponsors this race, and influences a bunch of ideas. But if you guys never watched the pre-race to this race, I highly recommend it. It's one of the coolest things I've seen NASCAR do, and it's great for the sport. It's great for the fans, and I just wanted to keep touching on this. Prime did an amazing job. I don't think we've touched on that enough. With pre-race, post-race, and during the race, I think everyone did a fantastic job with Kyle Edwards, Trevor Bayne, LaJoy, Steve Letarte, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Adam Alexander. Just fantastic stuff for their first time covering a race for NASCAR. So I'm glad we had a little bit of the break in the podcast to mention all this great stuff from NASCAR.
Yeah, absolutely. But, we do got to get back to racing, as we still have a whole nother 200 laps to get to. But you mentioned already Kyle Busch's wall contact around lap 220, but very soon after that, we will see Zane Smith have a really strangely hard contact down the backstretch. This is actually with the inside wall, and there wasn't really any great camera angles of this, so I'm a little curious for both of you that I believe both of you watched this race live, if there were any better camera angles on it. But man, when they showed this car was destroyed.
Yeah, I specifically remember this. He smashed the inside wall. He kind of got off turn 2, if I remember correctly, and just lost it completely. Didn't even hit the wall. And then he almost took out a guy on his inside, and then, just could not get it slowed down, smashed the inside wall. The hood flew off, and it almost looked like it was on fire, but it was just the caution lights. I thought he was on fire for a second, but one of the hardest hits I've seen at Charlotte on the backstretch for sure. It was very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, William Byron, this is the guy that had the #1 pit crew last year. Luke, I don't know what you might have wanted to add on here, but it's also a pit crew that has been struggling so far this year. So to see them, not only just William dominating on the racetrack, but to see his pit crew dominate on pit road as well.
No, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to mention his pit crew again, but just taking it on the restart, we'd see a lot of people, get super, super tight off here. We see Tyler Reddick, Chase Elliott, Gregson, they makes like contact at the 4. And then the next lap later, we'd see this battle back here with Blaney, Suarez, and Briscoe. And, this is a really interesting wreck in my opinion. And obviously I was incredibly frustrated because Blaney got the worst of it being a bystander, but it kind of looked like Suarez was tight in the middle, and then Briscoe, kept kind of pushing him up to the wall, and they didn't really give each other room. And then Briscoe, spun Suarez and just, wrecked Blaney into the wall. Another week where he just rashes out. It's not his fault, but I'm interested to hear your guys' points on this, because it was very, I don't really know. I don't want to blame anyone, but I don't really know who to say is at fault here.
Yeah, I have dissected this one multiple times, kind of over. I've seen it from the in-driver cameras, and it's really tough. Charlotte's a kind of tight track as it goes, but we see Briscoe in the middle, Suarez on bottom, maybe gets a little tight. It gets a little scary with how the grass kind of comes up. It is a tri-oval, so the front stretch isn't straight like Indianapolis. It's kind of like Daytona, but it's a lot tighter, only being 1.5 miles rather than 2.5 miles, with a lot less banking. The grass can kind of definitely almost be like that scare when you're exiting turn 4 and you're almost want to crank the wheel to the right, and probably not realizing Suarez, he not realizing he was 3 wide and thinking that it might have just been Briscoe on his outside. He ends up turning himself across Briscoe's nose after making contact with Briscoe because, well, there was another car on Briscoe's outside.
Yeah, that's a great point. Go ahead, Zach. I'll let you say your kind of. Yeah, that's a great point. Mentioning that stretch of runs where he didn't really finish too well. But for a guy like Blaney, I don't know how you keep your head down and keep going. I know he has a great team behind him, and I know eventually he does get that win as we're a little bit in the head at Nashville. Just another unfortunate break. Just to keep moving along here. Just the pit stops from Byron and Denny. I'm gonna keep saying it, and I'm probably gonna say it another 10 times this podcast. But pit stops, pit stops, pit stops. You got to execute on pit road, and these guys are doing it. So, and even Hocevar and Reddick. I don't want to just keep touching on Byron and Hamlin. Even they are executing on pit road as they're staying inside the top 10. But quickly on the restart, obviously Byron would get ahead, but we see Hocevar really show his number and show his face on Hamlin, and for the first time kind of get into this top 3 battle here, and actually he would clear Hamlin for second place, just briefly, but Hamlin would be able to pass him right back on the outside. So watch out for Hocevar's name as we're going to continue to mention him on throughout the stage.
Honestly, I don't have a whole lot to really elaborate on with Carson Hocevar overall or Denny Hamlin. It's really just a really good battle that we're seeing go on here throughout the end of stage 2. Excuse me, but it's really just goes to show you that if the racing is this good already, we're just over halfway through this race. So it kind of goes to show you what type of racing we're gonna have at the end of this thing. And I already mentioned this being a crown jewel race of NASCAR, so being on that level, with the Daytona 500, being on that level with the Southern 500, it's a huge race.
Yeah, 100% agree. I forgot to mention as a crown jewel, but I think everyone knows it already. So, winning this is an incredible accomplishment. But moving on from all the stuff here, Hamlin obviously, like I said, would clear Hocevar, and we'd see Hamlin and Byron, continue to battle and stay side by side, which only means that's going to bring Hocevar right up to them with running slower lap times. But Hamlin would clear Byron and be a new leader, and Hocevar, like I said, would get right back up to Byron and battle him for second place. So, I keep mentioning these top 3 drivers in this battle, but it's going on for 20 laps of just back and forth pack racing, and it's funny to say, but Hocevar is in a car that is nowhere near as developed as Byron or Hamlin's, and he's still continuing to run up with these guys and putting better lap times up than they are. So, we keep mentioning how Hocevar is such a good driver, but really this is his shining moment, running up here with 2 top dogs of the sport and passing them is really, really cool to see.
Yeah, for sure. It's something we see week in and week out. This is a guy that, like, at the start of the season, I did not expect to be talking about him as much as we are. And, obviously, being in the future, we know we're going to start, unfortunately, having to talk about him for the wrong reasons. But, that's kind of what you got to do when you're this young talent, coming in to the Cup Series. You got to show your face. You got to be willing to ruffle some feathers, which I think is an exact phrase that you've used in prior podcasts, and you can't be afraid to do that, and he certainly is not, as you see him running up here with the 2 of the big dogs of the sport.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. You mentioned showing it, ruffling his feathers, and people not liking it. He kind of reminds me of a very young Kyle Busch in that number 5 Hendricks car. He was very, very similar racing style, and people didn't like him for it, but he showed his name and showed his face, and it would eventually get him on that 18 JGR team, and that would he's going to go into the history, but going to go in the Hall of Fame. So it's a very similar storyline for Hocevar, and we can only continue. He gets the best ride moving forward, because I'd love to see him be a top guy. But finishing off with stage 3, there'd be a little bit of a battle with Hamlin and Byron, but Byron would get his stage win for stage 3, and Hamlin in second, Hocevar in third, Reddick in fourth, and Chastain we'd see for the first time we mentioned his name, who spun out in practice and didn't even get to qualify. We see him finishing the stage in 5th. So I'm gonna keep saying it, but he's executing on pit road and he's executing in the field. So, with these long green flag runs, you can see a lot of positions fluctuate inside the top 10 and new faces every single stage. So keep an eye out for Chastain because we are going to 100% going to mention his name in stage 4.
Yeah, I'm going to stay right on the Chastain topic. We talked about him briefly at the beginning, but after his practice crash, he's starting dead last. Literally not dead last. He'll start 39th, so the inside of row 20, which, looking forward, you can barely see the leaders, and it's 2-car rows. So to be this buried in the field and be in the top 5 going into the final stage, we mentioned long race. It's, maybe it's easy to get up there, but no, you're racing at the top level in NASCAR. It's never easy to pass any cars, let alone 35.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned they had to stay up all night. I completely forgot. I think they sit up to like 2 in the morning, and I know they stay up or they're super close to the track in Charlotte, but I think they'd had to be back at the track at like 6 in the morning to get that car finished up with. So some of the guys maybe got an hour of sleep. So the things you do to maybe get a crown jewel win, as we're going to go further in the podcast, we'll know. But incredible stuff from that Trackhouse team, and they always show resilience, and that's the name of Trackhouse as a whole. Just being there and not giving an inch.
Yeah, it's every point is exactly right there. It's really just the great teamwork, and Trackhouse. When I think of the word teamwork in NASCAR, Trackhouse is definitely one of the first teams that comes to mind. They're not the strongest team. I mentioned being a 4-star team going up against Penske, Joe Gibbs, and Hendrick. With how closely knitted they are between SVG, Suarez, and Chastain, even though they haven't been getting the finishes they've exactly wanted, it's really you almost feel like an unbreakable bond that as we get deeper into the season, even towards the end of this race, it's really a very difficult team to slow down once they get going. But moving on from there, the stage end, and we see all the cars pit, and as they're coming off of pit road, we're going to see Denny Hamlin off first, followed by Hocevar and Byron, but Hamlin didn't exactly get that tank of fuel all the way full, so it'll be really interesting to see what will happen towards the end of this race here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that point. And yeah, he executed on pit road, but not in the right way. He would leave pit road a little early, not get as much fuel as Byron or any other guys did, and you might be wondering, well, that's not going to be that much of a problem. Surely there'll be a caution, and they'll have to come back down again. Well, this is going to be a big problem, because if there's not a caution, he's going to have to pit earlier than everyone else and not be with that pit cycle. You could mention a big mistake, and for Denny, and as we're going to mention going forward in the podcast, this would definitely hurt his race.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how something just as fuel like that can really make that much of a difference of how an outcome of a race can be determined. Just kind of getting into NASCAR a few years ago and saying it can't possibly be that big of a deal. They all get the same thing on pit road. There's only one strategy. No, there's really not. There's a bunch of strategies that are going a bunch of different directions. Sometimes we only see 2 or 3 strategies, but some races, with the more cautions you get, or with this race having 3 stage breaks, you start to see 6, 7, even 8 different strategies, that might be just from 2 tires on a pit stop to 4 tires, or half a tank of fuel, or just little things where you can save half a second or even less.
100%. All it takes is one mistake for your race to get snap like that. It's tough break, but like you mentioned, the 6 to 10 pit stops they're gonna have to make a race. You have to execute on them, and just one can ruin it. Moving on here with all the pit stops that we mentioned, but just on the restart here, and this is where it hurts for me to say, just exiting turn 2 on the backstretch, we see Carson Hocevar experience an engine failure, and Chris Buescher would get caught up in it on the backstretch with his slowing car, and I mean, it sucks. A win for this kid, especially in this race, would elevate his career so much and give him so much confidence. And for an engine failure out of your control to happen for a team like Spire, I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this, but it just hurts. It hurts for him, and I feel for him. He did everything right, and he still didn't get a finish.
Yeah, it's just it almost makes you feel like how Ryan Blaney, how his season's been going so far. I mentioned it week in and week out on this podcast, the engine failures he's had, Phoenix, Miami, and he's getting caught up in wrecks that aren't his fault. And it almost seems like the same thing for Carson Hocevar. It's basically just a carbon copy in a Chevy instead of a Ford. But, besides the fact that you hate to see it for the kid, I've got really nothing else on that topic specifically.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I have one last point to make on this incident. This may be a crazy take, but I just kind of want to add, maybe my thoughts. I don't know if this car or this engine can maybe withstand being run this hard for this many laps. That could be why it failed. I mean, he's running in the top 5 the whole lap, running this hard with these 5-star teams and 5-star engines. Could it be the problem? I don't know. It's a 3-star engine and a 3-star team. Maybe, I don't know, this engine isn't used to be running this hard or up here and going this fast for this long. I don't know. That could be a crazy, just horrible take, but that's just my thoughts on maybe why this engine failure happened.
Yeah, it's honestly an interesting take, but it's certainly not out of the question. Like, we never really even have to have these conversations because, no offense to Hocevar, but he's kind of this outlier. We never see drivers for these teams, these Spire, these Rick Ware, these Legacy Motor Club. They're typically not up front, so these engines kind of being pushed to 110%, where, compared to like ECR power, the Hendrick power that might be, twice as good, and where they only need to go 80%, that could be the difference right there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it always brings a question with these points, but obviously that'll give a chance to for Hamlin to get back up here with Byron in the lead for first and second off this restart, and Hamlin would clear him in turn 1 and 2, but now we see this back and forth battle with Byron and Hamlin, and this was really, really cool to watch. Just two guys just passing each other back and forth, and really, showing themselves that they want to get this crown jewel one. I know Hamlin has one already back in 2022. I believe he got one. But this is a very, very cool battle for me to watch live. It was very fun to see.
Yeah, for sure. And this is just as I mentioned earlier. It's that final stage racing. No, we're not going for a stage win anymore. We're going for the race win. We're under 100 laps to go, and you're certainly coming down to it. But I got no other point to make there unless, Zach, unless you do.
Yeah, great points there. But now, with these guys battling in the lead, the race is now for third to be in that prime position if there's a caution or the pit cycle, which we're eventually going to have. So Ross Chastain and Tyler Reddick would be the ones battling, but I said to watch out for Chastain's name, and here we are. He would overtake third, and with Hamlin and Byron side by side, it's go time for Chastain, and he knows it. So with these guys battling back and forth, and Byron passing Hamlin, and vice versa, that would only bring Chastain closer to this pit cycle, and eventually if there is a caution.
Yeah, and you mentioned the pit cycle. Well, here we are. It's initiated by Austin Dillon in the 3 car with about 58 laps to go, and Chastain does have that spot for third, and at this point, Hamlin does have the lead over Byron, and just as this is happening, we see John Hunter Nemechek get tight off of turn 2 again into the wall. And I don't even think we really have to spend the time on it. Sturdy air once again for, I believe, the 4th or even 5th time this race. But moving on from there, the green flag cycle will continue. And we will see Ross Chastain be the last one to pit. Or I'm sorry, he'll be the second to last one to pit from the lead, and it'll allow Brad Keselowski, the last one to pit, to inherit the lead right around the end of these green flag pit stops.
Yeah, I don't have too much to say. I keep mentioning it. It's another green flag pit stop. So it's even harder for these guys to get their positions back, and harder to execute. Because there's up to full speed and then coming in the pits, but this would be the last pit stop that they would maybe have to make. So executing here is definitely huge, like you mentioned. But Ross Chastain would get cycled to the lead as Byron, Hamlin, and Briscoe and Tyler Reddick would come in after them. But Byron and Hamlin would exit the pits side by side with Byron blending out in front. So that was kind of another race that we're keeping eye on multiple races here with these green flag runs. I mentioned Chastain will be cycled to the lead, but Byron and Hamlin is a huge position that Byron would gain out of the pits.
Yeah, for sure. And, no later do we say that. And I mentioned the green flag pit stops being ended with Keselowski and him inheriting the lead. Well, it'll actually be Ty Gibbs. That's the only one that will not pit. And he's going to stay the leader and inevitably until Hamlin and Byron get up to him. And, he's going to start falling off pace. And kind of showing us that, well, this is going to be Hamlin or Byron for the lead. But just as we see that with about 15 to go, Chastain is passing Gibbs, and this is a 3-car battle now at the front.
Yeah, and along with the 3-car battle, this is where the race takes a turn. Denny Hamlin reports that his team did not get that second can of fuel into the car during their pit stops, and as soon as I heard this, I knew it was I'm going to throw a little shade. It was OHO, over for Denny Hamlin. He was not going to win this race at all, but this was completely on Hamlin. He just drove out of his box before that fueler even had a chance to get that can halfway done. I don't know if it was a miscommunication with Chris Gale, but it's like they barely even got the first can in his car, and for as long as as we have till the end of the race with basically 50 laps, it's a mistake that couldn't happen for Hamlin for as long as he's been doing this race.
Right. Luke, you kind of mentioned that you thought it was more Hamlin's fault, and Zach, I feel like for you kind of felt like it might have been more on not even the gas man's fault, maybe just a disconnection with the gas can. Well, was Hamlin told to go? Or, as I mentioned, I wasn't exactly able to see this live as there was no kind of video review on it. Or was it just a matter of, him going with the gas can still in the car or half in the car?
Yeah, I remember this very vividly, and I'm glad Zach mentioned, because, yes, the fueler did not get it in right away. He had a little bit of a mishap and spilled some fuel before he got it in, but Hamlin just drove away with the gas can still connected to the car. So I'm not blaming this 100% on Hamlin. It could have been Chris Gale telling him to go. I didn't get to hear what happened, but it's a 2-part battle. And if you're Hamlin, you gotta just, and I don't know if it was just Warren, so I don't even know if I should say this, but you gotta just stay there the extra half a second and maybe lose that time to Byron, but give yourself a chance to be there at the end.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with everything you said there. Sometimes it's it needs to be that mind over matter. We'd rather a third place than a 30th. And it's a very some might say easy decision, but he's a guy that he doesn't need points anymore. He has the wins. He's already in the playoffs. So is he just going for wins at this point? And he's like, well, if it doesn't pan out, it doesn't pan out. It's whatever. We move on. But it's just something that you would think for a team that is going to be a championship caliber team come October, November, and those are mistakes that when we get to that playoff time, that if you make those mistakes, it's going to be a quick exit.
For sure. And Zach, I don't know if you have a point to make on this, but I just want to say that's a fantastic point that you made there about being there for the playoffs, and this can't happen if you're Hamlin, especially as we're going to get close to the playoffs here. Yeah, and I'm just going to take over a little bit here because I have a lot to say as we move in close to this race. Obviously, Hamlin would eventually have to come down the pit road because he was not going to be able to make it on fuel. And they would get lapped, and coming off the pit road, he would get in front of Byron, and this is where we really see the Chastain and Byron battle, which is going to be for the win. And Byron would clear, but here's where I don't know. It's going to be tough for me to say because Logano and Hamlin, who were a lap down, I don't know if they were holding up Byron or slowing him down, but they would, Chastain would cut the lead down to basically his back bumper as he would get past Hamlin, and it looked to me, and I'm not saying this is 100% what Hamlin or Logano did, but it looked to me like they were almost purposely blocking Byron so that he wouldn't win. I'm not saying that 100%, and I'm not blaming anything on Hamlin or Logano. I'm not saying they would do that, but that's just what it looked like to me watching this race live. And if that is the case, that's very, very dirty.
Yeah, I don't even know where to go on this, Zach. Well, I'm kind of getting my words together. I don't know if you have any points to say, but it's kind of a tough subject. Yeah, I really don't have a whole lot else to say except, like they're on fresher stuff. So it doesn't look great for them that they're not driving off. Like Chastain and Byron, they're deep into a run, and the fact that they're able to hang with two cars that are fresh out of the pits, as Logano was in the same situation, I believe, and was on fresh stuff as well. But it just doesn't look great for the 22 or the 11.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that they were in fresher stuff because they should have been driving way off from them, and it was Logano on the bottom, Hamlin on the top, and they were just continuing getting slower and slower. Um, and I would understand if they moved up to the top or wherever Byron was, they moved away from so they could pass and have a decent race. But it almost looked like they just created a roadblock in turn 1 and 2, and just Byron was just had nowhere to go, and obviously Byron's not going to just drive through him and risk wrecking himself. So don't want to put words in people's mouths, like Zach said. Don't want to throw any stones, but that's just my take on it. But obviously that would mean Ross Chastain, being that aggressive driver he is, and not taking any chances, he was going to slide job William Byron going to turn 2. A very cool thing to see with Dale Jr. in the booth, as he loves his famous line, the slide job. And he would do it successfully, taking the lead on lap 395. And Byron just had nothing left. I mean, he used up all his stuff to get ahead. That almost a second lead over Chastain, and as soon as he got up to Hamlin and Logano, that time would go away. So Chastain would cross finish line first, get that crown jewel win. And Byron in second. Still a great day for Byron, but won all 3 stages and got second. So, I mean, he is very, very upset with that, and I don't blame him. I would have loved to see him win this race, to be the first driver to win all 3 stages and win the race.
Right. Chastain he goes on to win the race, but when you look at the points, Byron blows him out of the water on points. Not quite double, but with there being 3 stages, you can get the 30 stage points there, and then coming second, you can get 65 points there, with the stages and then the end of the race. So to see him get his 65 and then Chastain get 40, it's kind of crazy to see a 25-point difference for one position. To see Byron lead all these laps and then to fall short, it brings you to the line that, I love this line, but it's very cliche. And, it's, you don't have to lead all the laps. You just got to lead the last one, but it's a great job by Chastain. He did exactly what he had to do. Started all the way in the back, drove it all the way through the field, as we kind of hinted towards at the beginning of the podcast, and brought it home.
Yeah, I 100% agree. The last to first challenge completed by Chastain. Just a great story for that team. And that driver, smashing that watermelon, at midnight or almost 1 o'clock in the mornings. But, like you mentioned, Byron, 65 points, could have had 70, led 280 laps, and Chastain gets 50 points and gets the race wins. It's, it almost seems not fair, but that's just how it is. You got to be there at the end. But, that's my last final points for the race. Well, if you guys want to add any final things, or if not, we can go right into the race results.
I've got nothing else if you want to take us right into results.
All right. Obviously, Chastain with a win, he would get himself locked into the playoffs, smash that watermelon right on start-finish line. Very, very cool celebration, and very well captured by Prime. William Byron in second, like I said, led 280 laps, 65 points, and a great day, a great points day. He already has a win in Daytona. He would love to get another crown jewel win from the season, but you can't be too upset. Chase Briscoe started on the pole, finished his third, only leads 1 lap, but a top 3 finish for that team is huge, as he doesn't have a win yet, but he's well within the playoff bubble. And AJ Allmendinger, 16th, that Colleague team. I keep saying it, but he executed everything well, and he's that 2-3 star team, but I keep saying you execute and you get the good finish. So great job by that crew chief, pit crew. And rounding out the top 5, Mr. Brad Keselowski, his best finish of the year so far, and a very, very well-deserved top 5. I think we've mentioned his name 20 times for the wrong reason, but this is the first time really mentioning his name for the right ones, and it's very cool to say.
Yeah, for sure. This is a guy that has been through the exact same things as Ryan Blaney, and even Hocevar with how his race went up in smoke this week at Charlotte. But to be able to finally piece it all together and find that top 5 finish that team very much needs, hopefully can get that team pointed in the right direction. But moving on from there, we see the top 10 rounded out with 9 Chase Elliott, Michael McDowell, Christopher Bell, Ryan Preece in the front row, number 4 of Noah Gragson. Great to see him finishing in the top 10.
Yeah, for sure. 16 through 20th, we got Hamlin. He would eventually get back on the lead lap, and get a solid 16th finish with 44 points. A good salvage points day for him. Joey Logano 17th. Todd Gillen 34th. A good top 20 for that. Front row team. Ty Dillon in 19th. So a great a finish for the Colla guys with AJ getting that top 5, and then Austin Dillon running on the top 20. So a good points day for RCR. That's kind of the norm with them right now, running inside the top 20. That's just kind of where that team's at, I feel, in my opinion.
Yeah, you mentioned RCR, and that was where my pick to win was. I had Kyle Busch. He was so close in 22. He's got it done here in the past. It's just someone that he's been in that basket with Brad Keselowski, and Keselowski finally found the way to turn it up, and the 8 team just can't seem to find that. Moving deeper into the lineup, and we get to drivers that haven't been exactly running up front or just haven't even had the starts. Like we see the 87 of Connor Zilish. He's back here in 23rd. We see Tyler Reddick back in 26th. That's a 23-11 car that we expect to be running up front, especially at these intermediates. So to see him all the way back there is kind of interesting to see. And then we mentioned with his spin earlier, Bowman back in 29th. And all the way in the back, we see Larson, Blaney, Bubba Wallace, Hocevar, who had their problems that we mentioned with their wrecks and expired engines as well.
Yeah, I just want to mention Kyle Lars's name one last time, and I can't say this enough. His last chance to get the 1,100 miles done, and I don't know how many miles he done. He ran, I don't even 300 something laps in combined both races. So, not even close. But if he doesn't get the opportunity to do it again, I still think he's one of the best drivers that I've ever seen. So, hopefully he gets the opportunity to do it again, maybe with a different team in the IndyCar series, and maybe a different sponsor. But it just sucks. I'm not a Hendrick, I'm not the most Hendrick fan, but I think when anyone's doing this challenge, I'm going to be rooting for him and watching it along the way. So it's just unfortunate for him.
Yeah, for sure. He's already in the talk for that greatest of all time. He's up there with a 7-time champ and a guy that Dale Earnhardt, being that anyone over the age of 30 has known their whole lives, and to be the greatest to ever drive a stock car. And this guy's only got one championship, and it just really goes to show you that when you're racing against these guys in the modern era, it's the same as kind of Jimmy Johnson, that even though you don't have the championships or you're not all the way to top of the list in wins or in top 5s, top 10s, he's just purely there on skill, not even on merit. To see what he's going to continue to do with Hendrick, because we kind of mentioned it earlier, we don't see him going anywhere to IndyCar or anything like that. So if he continues to stay in NASCAR, I believe, Zach, you said it earlier at the beginning, he's just going to continue to excel, and who knows how many championships he might find himself with before he retires.
Yeah, 100% agree. If that's all you guys have for the race results, we can get into the last 2 segments of the podcast.
Yeah, that's all I got.
All right. So our next segment is our picks to win for next week. I understand the race has already happened. I'm going to keep saying this so people don't get confused. But Max and I send each other our picks to win for Nashville. Zach, I don't know if you had a guy in mind that you were predicting to win this race. If so, we just basically say who we think's going to win and kind of why, if the reason that you have one.
Yeah, so I say we go ahead and let Zach start if he's got a name in mind.
Yeah, if you have one, go ahead.
Yeah, well, you just stole my pick. So I don't have a whole lot more to say, except the fact, he's won there before. He can get it done. And of course, we already know what happens, and we know he will lead laps. We'll just have to wait and see if he gets it done in the end.
Yeah, those 2 great picks. And I was honestly debating picking Elliott, but my pick was that 8 of Kyle Busch. Ran well here last year. Unfortunately, got caught up in the just mess that overtime stuff was. But I really thought this was his going to be breakthrough moment for us here. Get that win, staple himself into the playoffs. But good picks overall. Moving into the last segment here, we got 2 questions on our last podcast. So very, very good stuff. You guys were definitely listening hard to the All-Star recap, and I'm just gonna read these ones. We're going to do one by one. So we'll read the first one. we'll answer our thoughts, and then we'll go into the second one here. So, first question here we got: how does Noah Gragson still have a ride in the top series? So, that's the question. Whoever wants to start off, floor is yours.
Yeah, I'll go first. A seat was open. That's exactly where my mind goes. Fans love him. He's a great personality, and he was winning races in the Xfinity Series, even though it might not be panning out exactly how he wanted to in the Cup Series. He's still young, and Carson Hocevar just seems to be blowing all the other rookies out of the water. And Gregson's not exactly a rookie anymore, but it kind of raises our expectations for all the rookies, and now like Xfinity to Cup, it's a different car, and it's another whole nother learning process. So I think the longer Noah Gregson's in this series, he's just going to continue to grow, and some drivers just need more time than others, in my opinion.
Here's what I'll say on it, and I'll answer your question as well. A lot of people forget that the team he's on, Haas Factory Team, was Stewart Haas Racing, and with Tony Stewart leaving that team, they lost a lot of funding. They lost 2 charters, as well. So I think this question is mainly about his string of bad finishes, but I don't really think it's his fault at all. You look at Cole Custer, a guy who just excelling in the Xfinity Series last year and the year before, and he comes in and he's running bottom 30s. So I don't think it's Noah Gragson's fault at all. He's a team man. We just saw him at Mexico City, rebuilding his car, and helping out the team. So the fans love him, as he won the fan vote. So I don't think I could see a guy taking his spot in Xfinity because, as we see with Cole Custer, he just came out of Xfinity, dominating Xfinity, and he's still running, not too well. So I think I just don't think Noah Gragson has got a legit shot yet with the teams that he's been on.
I 100% agree with, all the points there. I'll let you go into the second question. I know you mentioned there were 2.
All right, so I'm going to answer this question first, because I understand why the question was asked. Second question here is, why do you dislike Joey Logano? Is it purely based on his attitude on the track? Do you think his attitude or skill prevail, or maybe it's both combined that prevail? I don't know, just looking for your thoughts. So I 100% understand why this question was asked, and I may have gone a little too harsh on my opinions on Joey Logano. So I'm going to keep it, I'll do a little bit of a longer detail why I don't like him. First of all, I think he's an amazing race car driver, and he's done a ton of stuff for the sport. But he has this two-faced personality. He's kind of like Green Goblin, if you ever seen Spider-Man. He's all smiley and laughy, and then as soon as he gets in the car, he just turns to this like hypocritical just guy that just like it hurts to listen to his voice sometimes. And I'm trying to be as nice as I can, but he'll run someone hard, or excuse me, yeah, he'll run someone hard, and then someone does the same thing back, and then he'll just punt someone into the wall, like we see at Darlington in 2022 with him wrecking Bowman, or we see last week with the All-Star stuff that happened with Bell. I mean, the guy just can't. He has such an ego. He doesn't know how to lose. I feel like, and as guy as old as he is, and some of the wins he's had, I just don't. I don't know. I think it's just mainly because of his championships that he has, and how he won them, or how he got some of his wins, and just the overall picture I have of Logano. I don't have anything nice to say, so I'm just not going to say anything more on it. I think he's a fantastic race car driver. Just how he carries himself off the track, I just really don't like.
Yeah, I kind of absolutely agree with you. It reminds me a lot for those of you that watch golf. Like, it's very similar to that Rory McIlroy personality. Like, he's great at what he does, but he just can't seem to find himself to be very likable, based on things he might do, things that he says. He just doesn't carry himself in the best way that he probably could for, as good as he is at what he does. But that's kind of really all I have to say on it, unless, Zach, if you have a point there. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Fantastic points. That's pretty much all I got for the race and everything going on. But just want to say, fantastic podcast. I love the back and forth that we had. I would appreciate you, Zach, for coming on, giving lots of insight. Let us know if you guys like this kind of style podcast. We skipped through parts of the race that weren't too important. We tried to keep this one, under 2 hours. But I love this style that we had. The questions back and forth, the banter. I think it's gonna be an easy listen for you guys. Hopefully it is. But if you guys want to have, I do want to have one final message. So if you guys want to say anything before I say that, then go right ahead.
I got one thing. I just want to thank Zach for coming on. Luke, it's just been just us for the first 10 weeks or whatever it's been, and it's nice to hear a third voice kind of get that extra opinion. Then
Mhm.
I think what we really need to try to do is we want to try to get more guests on here. So for those of you that listen, if you ever want to get in on a podcast, it's not hard for us to do. All it is, it's an easy email, share a link, and it gets you right in here, and you can share your opinions. So that's all I've really got. But besides, yeah, just thanks again for coming on, Zach.
All right. I like it.
Yeah,
I like
our
that.
next race is I can't even think of what it is. I'm still living in the past. So Luke, if you want to go first, and I'll pick up the track.
Well, so are
Obviously
we
being
saying
Pocono,
our
but
picks for Pocono?
go right ahead. Yeah,
Well, don't want to be a little too biased here, but I'm going with my guy Ryan Blaney. Come on now. He won there when we were there last year. I think he's gonna go back to back. Don't want to be biased, but I 100% am being biased here, but got to go for my 12 boy Ryan Blaney.
go ahead, Zach. I'm still thinking. Yeah, and then, well, I guess I'll just have to throw in my villain pick. I'm going with the 11 of Denny Hamlin. How
I
could
knew
you
it.
not? He's won plenty of times here, so it's kind of hard to go against him. He's been disqualified a time before, but he's known for pressing his luck at Pocono, and he for sure knows how to get it done. So I think that's my lock going into this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, great picks. My last point before we end the podcast, excuse me. We're gonna try to do one or two podcasts before Pocono. Try to get caught up as much as we can. But over the next day, I'm gonna try to create an Instagram and a Twitter page for us, and maybe a YouTube channel to post the audios, just so you guys can follow us and keep up to pace with whatever's going on, because we want to grow this as much as we possibly can. But I mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast. We're going to do some exclusive videos and try to interview some drivers. We have these special passes that we were given to get exclusive media and see kind of the garage area. So gonna be cool stuff at Pocono that you guys are definitely going to want to see over on the Instagram. So it's in the next podcast. I'll go over everything once I have it all set up. Last point I want to make here is we're podcast now available on Amazon Music and iHeartRadio podcasts. I mean, I think I can now say anywhere where you get your podcast, you can listen to us, unless you use some like foreign third party set that I've never heard of. But it's available anywhere. Listen away, give us a follow, give us a rating. I try to grow this podcast as much as we can. And if you want to be on the podcast, comment down below on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and we'll try to get you on. So thank you guys so much for listening. Just under 2 hours, and yeah, I can't wait for the next podcast. Thank you guys.
Yeah, have a good one, everyone.